What's happening, everybody? This your boy Charles Wells coming at you again with another edition of SWACtalk, the show where we cover the SWAC inside and out. And we're gonna drop a little bit of content here on YouTube today. Not gonna have a podcast today. Probably have one coming in the next couple of weeks. Just gonna hop on YouTube and do the YouTube thing for a minute. But before we get started, I want to go ahead and throw out the socials as usual. The socials are down in the description. Facebook.com/SWACtalk, Twitter.com/SWACtalk76, Instagram.com/SWACtalk, and SWACtalk76@gmail.com is the email address. So take advantage of all those opportunities to get at us, and we'll be glad to get back with you no matter what the topic is. We'll chop it up all the time. So that's that. As I said, the podcast is found on anchor.fm/SWACtalk. It can be found on Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. Search SWACtalk, SWACtalk, all one word, as you know by now. And since you're here on YouTube, why don't you go ahead and like the videos, share them, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're at 118 subscriptions in about a month's time. That's amazing. I'd like to thank y'all for the support that I've gotten so far. So I want to thank y'all. I want to continue to try to do the best I can to show my little corner of the SWAC verse and continue to take a part in this growing HBCU sports YouTube community. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to the stuff. Today I wanted to do what I'm calling my way too early 12-team conference schedule previews. And this is only going to be me talking about each team's schedule. I'm not going to predict games or anything. I'm going to go over the schedules and talk about the games that stand out to me. You have to wait till I do my team previews closer to the season to get any predictions from me. I'm not going to go that way too early, but I just want to go ahead and put the schedules out there in case anybody hasn't seen or heard them, and just trying to get a little content going since this is now the off season. The spring season is over, so now we're in the off season, which is kind of weird because we would already have been in the off season in a normal schedule. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start off with the 2021 spring SWAC champions, Alabama A&M. Now their schedule is that I have. I think it's a 10-game schedule right now, so I'm sure they're gonna add another game. But right now their schedule opens up on September 4th at home in the Louis Cruz Classic against South Carolina State. September 18th they go to Daytona to take on Bethune-Cookman. September 25th they play Tuskegee in the Gulf Coast Challenge in Mobile. October 2nd, they're at Grambling. October 9th, they play Jackson State for homecoming at home. October 16th, they play Florida A&M at home. October 30th, the Magic City Classic in Birmingham against Alabama State. November 6th, at home against Mississippi Valley. And the last date that I have on their schedule right now is a SWAC championship game rematch on November 20th, which is definitely a game that I want to keep my eyes on against Arkansas Pine Bluff. So looking at their schedule, they have some good non-conference HBCU games. The South Carolina State game is a nice matchup. Tuskegee is a local matchup, and that's a game that's going to draw interest, and it's being played in Mobile, so that's an opportunity for them to play in front of another part of the Alabama audience. And continue to branch out and take advantage of that. SWAC-wise, first SWAC game on the road at Bethune-Cookman is definitely the game to pencil in and circle. Homecoming against Jackson State, that's definitely going to be big. JSU is going to be coming with some heat. And it's homecoming. They're going to want to spoil Jackson's homecoming. It's kind of funny that Jackson is being made homecoming because, a lot of teams like to schedule and I'm not saying this to diss Jackson because that's not what I'm doing. But a lot of teams schedule an easy game for homecoming. But Jackson State as homecoming bait is definitely going to be a tough out for them. that's just an interesting game to choose for that. Florida A&M at home the next week, so there's a nice 2-game home stretch. Magic City Classic after most likely will be a bye week. So, and then closing out with Valley and Pine Bluff, which is obviously a championship game rematch. Very good home schedule for the Bulldogs. Jackson State, Florida A&M, Valley, and Pine Bluff. Those are really good matchups at home. That's a nice home schedule, and that's a schedule that you can really sink your teeth into. And they're definitely going to test these guys. They're going to be tested right out the gate, and I can't wait to see how they respond. So that's the Alabama A&M Fall 2021 schedule. Next up is Alabama State. Their Fall 2021 schedule opens up at home on September 4th against Miles College. They play Auburn in a non-conference FBS money game on September 11th. September 25th, they play their first home SWAC game against Bethune-Cookman. And then October 2nd, they're at Florida A&M in their first road conference game. October 9th, they play Arkansas Pine Bluff for homecoming, so that's another team with a tough homecoming game. October 16th, the Hornets go to Jackson State. After a bye week, they play Alabama A&M in the Magic City Classic on October 30th. November 6th, they're at Prairie View. November 13th, they're at Valley, and then they close out the season at home. Then they close out the SWAC season at home on November 20th against Texas Southern, and then they play Tuskegee in the Turkey Day Classic on November 25th, which is Thanksgiving. And if you don't know, the Turkey Day Classic is always a huge game for Alabama State. At one point, it was their homecoming, but I guess they chose to not do that anymore. But Tuskegee and Alabama State have played many, many years on Thanksgiving for the Turkey Day Classic. There was a few years where Tuskegee decided they wanted to make a run at the playoffs in Division II, so they moved out of that game. But now it's back, so that's a matchup that I love. Tuskegee, has his, in recent history, has given Alabama State some problems. So that's not an easy out just because they're Division II. This is a huge rivalry, and these two teams get out through it, and I'm glad they're back playing in the Turkey Day Classic. Looking at Alabama and Alabama State schedule, after the Miles game and obviously the money game at Auburn, they have a tough stretch of games. Bethune-Cookman, Florida A&M, Pine Bluff, Jackson State, Alabama A&M, Prairie View. That's a tough stretch of 6 games in the middle of your season that can make or break your season right away. Luckily for them, I guess you could say half of those games are in the state of Alabama. 2 are at home. 1 is a neutral site. The other 3 games are on the road in very tough places to play. So if the Hornets can go through that part of their schedule with little or no damage, then you got to look out for them to be a contender in the East Division. Moving on next to our first new team in the SWAC, the Bethune-Cookman University Wildcats, who probably have maybe one of the best fight songs that I love, next to Devil's Gun by Mississippi Valley, but that's another topic for another day. They open up their season at UTEP on September 4th. They play at UCF on September 11th in Orlando. They open up their their first SWAC season at home against Alabama A&M on September 18th. Then they play Alabama State on the road for their first road SWAC contest on September 25th. October 2nd, they host former MEAC foe South Carolina State. October 9th, they play Mississippi Valley for homecoming. October 16th, they face Prairie View at home. October 23rd, they go to Jackson State. November 6th, they host Alcorn at home. November 13th, they take the trip to Grambling, Louisiana to take on the Grambling Tigers. And then November 20th is the Florida Classic in Orlando. against the Florida A&M Rattlers. So again, this is a very tough schedule. Bethune-Cookman is playing 2 FBS games to start their season off, and then they also have a non-conference affair against South Carolina State. So this is a very challenging schedule for them. That opening stretch of games at the start of the season, 2 FBS money games, two conference games against both Alabama schools, and then a game at South Carolina State. That's a tough stretch before you come home for Valley at homecoming, and then you go immediately back into a tough stretch. Prairie View, Jackson State, Alcorn, Grambling, and FAMU. So we know that Bethune-Cookman has had FAMU's number in recent years, and that's still something that you can't really discount. But eventually, FAMU has to get on the board. Bethune-Cookman has won 9 straight games in this series, so you figure 10 is possible, but that's gonna be a tough break for the Wildcats. Looking at the schedule, it's basically broke up into 2 parts with Valley in the middle. I guess you can. I'm not trying to disrespect Mississippi Valley, but they're a team that's gonna be a tougher team to face this year. But they're still working out some kinks. But this is a nice schedule again. Really challenging early with the money games, and then the 2 conference games and a tough non-conference affair. So we'll see how the Wildcats handle that. Our next team is again another newcomer to the conference, the Florida A&M Rattlers, and they jump feet first into the SWAC with a September 5th matchup in Miami in the Orange Blossom Classic against Jackson State. That's a big game. I mean, even if Jackson State wasn't being coached by Deion Sanders, FAMU Jackson State is a big something. And to open up your season with that game is gonna honestly probably let both fan bases know where they stand, because somebody's already gonna take a L in week 1 in the conference. And the way I'm thinking that this East Division is gonna go, you can't really afford too many L's. So this is a tough matchup, and it's gonna be probably the biggest game of the week in the conference, because a lot of people are playing non-conference games. So this is definitely going to be a huge matchup. The next September 11th, Florida A&M comes home to host Fort Valley State. September 18th, they head down to Tampa to take on the USF Bulls. They play their next conference opponent, which is going to be their first home conference game, against Alabama State on October 2nd. They host South Carolina State on October 9th. October 16th, they play their first true road game in conference when they go to Alabama A&M. October 23rd, they go to Mississippi Valley. October 30th, they play Grambling for homecoming, which is going to be a game that I think is going to draw a huge crowd, regardless of the fact that it's homecoming. Grambling and FAMU is another one of those historical matchups that you like to see. So I know eyes are going to be on that. November 6th, they take the trip to Baton Rouge to take on the Southern Jags, and that's a matchup that, if you don't know, then you're gonna learn. You need to talk to some Rattlers and talk to some Jags, and they'll tell you how this matchup goes. They've played, this is really probably gonna be the start of what this rivalry used to be at one point. At one point they were, I think, the longest running non-conference rivalry between HBCUs, but now it's back on, and now it's a conference matchup, so a lot of things are really going to be heightened, and that's a matchup I'm circling. And if you can get to Baton Rouge for that game, I suggest you do, because if the Marching 100 makes the trip and the Human Jukebox is there, then that's even more fire on the pot. So we're gonna definitely keep that game circled. November 13th, the Rattlers stay on the road. They head to Pine Bluff to take on Arkansas Pine Bluff, and then they close out their conference. They close out their schedule with a November 20th date in Orlando against Bethune-Cookman in the Florida Classic. So This again is a nice schedule, and like I said, that Jackson State FAMU game is definitely gonna be lit. I guess people still say lit, but whatever. It's gonna be hot. That's gonna be a game to definitely keep an eye on. Um, Fort Valley State's a winnable game. Obviously, it's a D2 matchup, so that's a matchup that you should win. Um, a money game against South Florida, and then you come into a 3-game stretch, 2 conference games, sandwiching South Carolina State. 2 of those 3 games are at home. After a trip to Valley, you come home for Grambling. Then you have a pretty tough end with 2 road games in Louisiana and Arkansas, and then the Florida Classic. So nobody really has an easy schedule that I can see right now. So if you're looking, right now, even if I could, it'd be hard for me to pick wins and losses because a lot of these games are gonna be really tough matchups. Now week to week, obviously that'll change, but right now it's a really tough thing to do. So we're gonna move on to the Jackson State Tigers, the Blue Bengals. They take on FAMU, as I said before, in Miami in the Orange Blossom Classic. Again, huge game. September 11th. This game is gonna draw a ton of hype. Eddie George and Tennessee State against Deion Sanders and Jackson State in the Southern Heritage Classic in Memphis. These 2 teams, they hook up. These games are always wild. They kick returns for touchdowns and back-to-back possessions. High-scoring games, defensive games, you name it. These 2 teams go through it. And when you add these 2 high-name coaches on that, it's gonna be another game to keep your eyes on. September 18th, Jackson State remains out of conference as they head to Monroe to take on the UL Monroe Warhawks. And then they play Delta State, the Fighting Okra, on September 25th in Jackson. They play Alabama A&M on October 9th for the I guess you could say the true road SWAC opener. Then they come home for homecoming against Alabama State on October 16th. They host Bethune-Cookman on October 23rd. October 30th, they go to Mississippi Valley. November 6th, they host Texas Southern. November 13th, they go to Southern, which is another game that I suggest if you can make the trip. If you can't make Southern FAMU, then you need to make Southern and Jackson. Both of those games are in Baton Rouge. Those are 2 huge matchups that if you want to catch a lot of atmosphere, those are a couple of those games outside of the huge classic games and that Orange Blossom Classic between Florida A&M and Jackson State. And then they close out their season at home against Alcorn, and I still call it the Soul Bowl. So that's a huge matchup. And this schedule, again, that first game is going to be tough. Tennessee State's a wild card, but it's going to have hype out the you-know-what. 2 non-conference games. Then they come back into conference play with a tough 3-game slate against Alabama A&M, Alabama State, and Bethune-Cookman. A trip to Valley, which is always tough. You never know what Valley going to give you in the Delta. And they typically play Jackson tough at home. So that's a game that's not a pure gimme, but it's obviously a winnable game. At home against Texas Southern is a game that they can manage. And then they close out with 2 tough West Division opponents in Southern and Alcorn, both rivalry games that are going to be really heated. And finally, to close out our East Division segment, we're going to talk about the Mississippi Valley State Delta Devils. And their schedule is always a challenging affair. They never slack in non-conference opponents. They open up their season on September 4th against Murray State on the road. They go to Stephen F. Austin on September 18th. September 25th, they play their first home conference game against Southern. October 2nd, they play North Carolina Central for homecoming. October 9th, they go to Bethune-Cookman. October 16th, they host Alcorn. October 23rd, they host FAMU. October 30th, they host Jackson State. November 6th, they're at Alabama A&M. November 13th, they host Alabama State. And November 27th, they're at Prairie View. And this schedule is hard as hell. That's all I can say. This schedule, I mean, obviously, it's a SWAC, it's a SWAC schedule, but this schedule is hard as hell. You don't have any breaks anywhere on this schedule. You have two non-conference FCS opponents on the road. You come home to open up your conference schedule against Southern. You have North Carolina Central for homecoming. You go to Bethune-Cookman. You got Alcorn at home. You got Florida A&M at home. You got Jackson at home. You go to Alabama A&M. You got Alabama State at home and Prairie View. That is no easy game on the schedule at all. I salute Valley for challenging themselves, man. If they make it through this schedule with 5 or 6 wins, then they're gonna be a SWAC contender in the upcoming future. There is no break for them, man. I wanna pick a stretch, but there is no stretch. That basically from the start to the finish is tough. But if you want to just say from October 9th to November 27th, all tough SWAC games. Now, luckily, 4 of those games are at home, but those are tough opponents, man. Valley gonna have to strap up and come with it. So that schedule, man, I really saw that and I was like, wow, because this is my initial time paying attention to it. So tough slate for Valley, and they're gonna have their work cut out for them, and we'll see what they do. So that's gonna do it for our East Division. Way too early schedule previews. Sunday we'll do the West Division, and we'll continue this road through the SWAC, and we'll talk about all these teams and what they have ahead of them in the fall. So we'll catch y'all on the rebound.